Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Khan, I wanted to ask you about price gouging in the food market and the FTC's role in alleviating the pressure that families are feeling here. Over the last 4 years, food prices have risen over 25%. That's according to the Consumer Price Index. Large corporations like to blame inflation on supply chain shocks. Report after report shows that the price increases have been driven by large corporations taking advantage of an outsized market to raise prices on the backs of working people. And again, there is no food shortage in the U.S. So FTC released a report finding that large grocery retailers, quote, seem to have used rising costs as an opportunity to further raise prices to increase their profits, which remain elevated today, end quote. I know your agency and the administration have been trying to address the financial pressures consumers are feeling. What actions has the FTC taken to date to rein in high food prices?
So the FTC earlier this year sued to block the Kroger-Albertsons merger because we alleged that that would result in higher prices for American consumers. As you noted, we also have done a study looking at supply chains in the grocery sector and trying to understand both what happened when these supply chains seized up and what's happened now that those stresses have been relieved. What we found was that consolidation and concentration can contribute to severe supply chain disruptions. Because if you concentrate production, if you put all of your eggs in one basket, a single disaster or a single outbreak can lead to all sorts of cascading problems, and the entire supply chain can seize up. And so promoting competition is good for more resilient supply chains. We also found that when these supply shortages hit, big companies were able to get special discounts, special access from big suppliers, and independent grocers got shut out. And so there can be an asymmetric impact where big corporations get out ahead and smaller corporations get left behind. We're also hearing a lot of concerns from independent grocers about some of that discrimination and how it could be leading to higher costs. So all of that is on our radar, and we're scrutinizing it closely.
So, and again, is there a way in which to, you've talked about what's on the radar, USDA and DOJ, working with them to deal with lowering food prices?
Yeah, absolutely. We work with both of them. We also have a lawsuit pending right now taking on practices by the two big pesticides manufacturers. We allege that their anti-competitive practices result in farmers overpaying by billions of dollars, and then farmers inevitably pass on those costs to consumers. So we have a lawsuit pending. We got a great victory at the motion to dismiss stage, and we're hoping if we're successful, that'll contribute to lower food prices as well.
Mm-hmm. Just as we wrote a letter, several of us, to the president. This is action on high food prices, and prohibiting exclusionary contracting by dominant firms in the industry, guidance on potential violations of the Robinson-Patman Act and Section 5 of FTC Act, cross-agency collaboration. That really is what you're referring to. So I hope you'll consider all of these options. I look forward to working with you on this issue. It is the biggest concern that the American people have, that they've gone to the grocery store and they're getting priced out, and that shouldn't happen. Let me move to infant formula, where you've done a report that examines some of the factors that led to the nationwide shortage of infant formula in 2022. Concerning for WIC participants who purchase more than half of infant formula in the United States. And that infant formula crisis really demonstrated the fragility and the hyper-consolidation of the U.S. infant formula market. 3 companies controlling upwards of 97% of the market. You mentioned several policy changes at FDA, USDA to improve access to safe infant formula for families in my state and across the country. In addition to the actions taken by FDA and USDA, what additional actions can FTC take to promote competition in the infant formula market? Address WIC if you can for a moment. Does that mechanism create large savings for the government allows WIC to provide more benefits within budget restraints, but do you believe that single supplier contracts will be a long-term problem in addressing the consolidation in the infant formula market?
So there's no doubt that WIC is such an essential program. When we looked at the infant formula market, we did see some suggestions that the current approach to WIC contracting, which are basically the single source contracts, can encourage consolidation and harm competition in ways that locks out some of these smaller formula manufacturers from the market, and also means that if you have a single contamination in a single factory, that can create shortages across the country. And so there's no doubt that, there are benefits from the current approach, but there are also downsides when it comes to creating a more fragile system. And so I think we need to figure out what's a better and more optimal balance there so that we don't have such a fragile market that really hurts American families.
Well, we saw the effect of what happened in with infant formula, which was an enormous crisis. We shouldn't let that crisis just pass without trying to address some of the issues. What I would love to do is to work with you and to look at how we're going to promote that competition in the market and how, without disrupting the flow of WIC benefits because they are needed, but how we can have a different approach to not further encouraging consolidation. So thank you. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for indulging the additional time. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Now recognize Mr. Womack for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Chair Khan, to the committee. I know my friend Cindy Hoyer is going to talk a little bit more about cars. The cars rule, we'll dig into that too a little bit. And in your opening comments, you talked about the work that you've done on robocalls, on unwanted telephone traffic coming into the homes of everyday Americans. And congratulations on that, but you haven't fixed the problem, right?
That's right. We have seen a significant drop in complaints, but obviously, robocalls are still a scourge. There's
Is
no
it
doubt.
possible that the reason you don't have as many complaints is people have just given up?
It's possible. I mean, we have been.
I think it's
undertaking-
probable. Because I used to hear a lot from people, and in conversations, I still get comments. They're still getting this. So I would, on one hand, I would congratulate you for bringing the enforcement actions that you've brought on people performing this unwanted service into America's homes, but the problem is not fixed, and we still get a lot of concerns about that. So I'd be careful not to make that your calling card. You're asking for a 25% increase over the enacted 24 level. From 425 and change to 535. In just a few seconds, because I got a limited amount of time, what's the justification there?
So the justification is that there are unfunded pay increases, there are higher costs we face because of inflation unrelated to pay, and then we also have to make critical investments.
25%?
We also have to make critical investments in some of our tech upgrades. Sometimes, we now have to analyze huge amounts of data. Right now, we don't always have the capacity to analyze that data in-house. We also need to do modernization of our complaint database, and so all of those costs are included. Again, 70% of the FTC's budget is our people, and so those pay increases, especially when they're not funded, do hit pretty hard.
Fair enough. We'll have a lot more debate about the size of that increase. To another line of questioning, before you were confirmed in 21, your background was in academia, where you've argued in support of dramatically expanding the FTC's regulatory and enforcement powers. From being the only regulator to challenge the merger of two luxury fashion firms, Tapestry and Capri, to blocking Illumino's acquisition of cancer startup Grail, it's clear to us that you continue to hold this view by blocking countless mergers. Are there any mergers that are good for the economy, in your view?
So 98% of all mergers go through without even a second question being asked by the government. It's 2%.
That's because you don't have enough staff to come after them, right? Is that the problem?
Look, there are a whole bunch of mergers that pose legal issues, and we have an obligation to protect the American people from illegal consolidation. That's the job Congress has given us, and we do that job without fear or favor. One of the transactions you mentioned, the Illumina Grail merger, that was unanimously voted out before I arrived. The commission unanimously issued an opinion believing that deal was illegal, and we got a resounding win in the Fifth Circuit last year, saying that the FTC was right. This was an anti-competitive deal. So I think we're getting it right.
Well, it's often been said that a broken clock is right twice a day. And so I'm not going to dispute the fact that there are things that the FTC is doing that strike the right balance. I think the challenge for us is where is there too much government? I mean, you talked about you gave the example on cars, nitrogen-filled tires versus regular air tires. Do we need the government to tell us that? Is that what the purpose of government is? I struggle with too much government. As a matter of fact, academia has reported that because of your background, that you've openly admitted, in someone's words, preferring to err on the side of overly aggressive enforcement rather than too passive enforcement. Do you admit to that?
Well, Congressman, I do think that over the last 40 years, we've seen huge amounts of consolidation that has resulted in a more centralized economy, right? I mean, one of the contributors of America's economic success has been open, competitive markets and free enterprise. And if we allow too much centralization, that's going to set us back. And so I believe, and Congress has charged the FTC with vigorously enforcing the antitrust laws to ensure we have free enterprise and fair competition, and that's what we do.
Well, we'll hold some of these questions for a little bit later, but suffice it to say, the challenge for the members of this committee, given the pressure on the discretionary budget of the U.S. government, is to how much of this government can we actually afford, and where is there too much government? And that debate, I think, is still alive and well. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Womack. We will now recognize Mr. Molinar.